You're on the road beyond. I'm Todd Duplantis. Welcome to our Facebook Live and YouTube audiences. Thank you for joining us tonight. We've got two great episodes coming your way, some intriguing discussion and so much more. All of it brought to you by myself and my co-host, Ike McFadden, joining me along with producer Pete Haviland. Good evening, gentlemen.
Hey, dude, how are you?
Oh, we're just fine. Pete, did you get your dog to be quiet? We had some issues before we went live with Pete and his pup, who apparently needed some attention. Pete, have you ironed that out?
Does it sound like it?
Doesn't sound like it. Okay. All right. Okay. We're going to put Pete on hold for a second. We figure we kick things off. Last week we told you our favorite breakfast food places. Before we get to paranormal discussion, we're going to discuss something very important. The weirdest soda flavor you've ever experienced. Ike, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I had to give that some thought, but then it occurred to me. I've traveled a lot, as you know, and I was in Hong Kong about, I guess, a couple of years ago.
Right.
And the Hong Kongese folk, whatever you call them, are really into a couple of interesting condiments. One of them being seaweed flavor, and
wow.
So there was actually a seaweed flavored version of Pepsi.
Did you try it?
I did, and it was kind of spicy, and it did taste a little bit like seaweed, and it was not really something I would associate with a soda that I really want to drink. But yeah, I had it.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, that's a pretty good one, Pete.
Well, I had the opportunity of trying something called sweet corn, and it comes from it tasted kind of like a watered down cream corn.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Okay. The weirdest soda I had, I bought it when I was in Tennessee a couple of years ago. It was a funnel cake flavored soda. Brought it home. I couldn't even get a 5-year-old to drink that stuff. Nobody would try it. Nobody would try it. So it didn't quite work. But weirdest sodas. There you go. There's our tidbit to kick things off. We've got an interesting show lined up for you. We're going to be talking paranormal topics tonight. Maybe some ghosts, maybe some Civil War ghosts. And we've got a lawyer to break it all down for us, Ike.
That's right. We've got Lisa Livingston Martin. She's a lifelong resident of Missouri living in Webb City. And as you mentioned, she's an attorney with long-standing interests in history and the paranormal, which I guess is probably somewhat unusual for an attorney. She's a co-team leader in the Paranormal Science Lab research group, which focuses on paranormal research at historic locations. She and the Paranormal Science Lab were featured on the documentary Twisted Believers on the Weather Channel, focusing on an investigation of paranormal activity experienced in the aftermath of a tornado in Joplin, Missouri. She's the author of Civil War Ghosts of Southwest Missouri, Haunted Joplin, and a number of other books.
Lisa is a frequent speaker on the paranormal and the connection between the history of locations and paranormal activity. She's also the co-host paranormal talk show called Paranormal Science Lab Live on Fridays at 7 p.m. You can check out her Paranormal Science Lab's website and Facebook page. We'll have some information in the social media posts for the show. And right now we're going to welcome Lisa Martin to the show. Welcome, Lisa. Good to have you with us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. And I have to say my experiences in soda are not as vicarious as you all have been. I guess I kept that to alcohol. I don't know.
Weirdest flavor? You have a weirdest flavor of alcohol you've ever tried?
Actually, I've had bacon whiskey.
Okay, that's a pretty good one, but that actually, Ike would drink that. So
I would totally drink that.
Okay, I figured that's not even a question there. Okay, Lisa, I want to ask you, usually when people are investigating or research the paranormal, there's a personal connection or experience that brought it on. Over the years, did you have that one experience that got you interested in the paranormal, or what drove you towards it?
Well, I grew up on a farm that was the site of a 6-day battle during the Civil War. So we did have things that would happen there, and didn't take too long growing too big to figure that out, that be aware of things that not everyone wanted to talk about or acknowledge. And so I've always been interested in the paranormal and unexplained mysteries. But really what got me interested in researching and investigating, writing books, was, number of years ago, probably 20 years ago now, maybe a little more. I was looking to buy a house, my ex-husband and I, and we were going through a house, actually a block and a half from where I live now. And it was a turn of the century arts and craft home, very, very nicely redone and large. And we'd gone through the upstairs, and I come downstairs with the agent. We're standing in the living room, and he had a nice switchback staircase, about 4 flights. And he had lingered upstairs, and my husband, he started coming down the stairs, and he'd stop every step or two and look over his shoulder and everything before he's down. I mean, there's 4 flights of steps. I'm thinking, what is wrong with you? This woman's going to think you're nuts. And he finally gets down to the living room and says, "Did you guys hear that?" And we were both like, no. Of course, anything paranormal was, not on my radar that day. Right. I was thinking about buying a house. And then later we're in the basement, and the old boiler is still sitting in the basement. And it's a large area, big, thick walls, and a couple of side rooms. And I kind of lingered there, just kind of looking over the space. And they had walked to one of the side rooms. And all of a sudden, I had the experience of a thumb being laid across one side of my neck. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 fingers, ice cold, almost dry ice cold. And then the sensation going through the back of my neck. And so, I kind of chuckled, well, that's a little up close and personal. And I walk over to where they were in time to hear the agent say, "Now, I'm not sure what this room would have been used for." And I walk to the doorway. One wall is all old apothecary cabinets. One wall has 7 large metal sinks and the largest drain in the concrete floor that you've ever seen. And I just looked at her and I said, "I'll tell you what it was. It was the embalming room."
Wow.
And I turned around and started towards the stairs, and I can still hear her stiletto heels on the concrete following me. And, well, I should tell you this was a mortuary in the 1920s. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of figured that out. And we ended up not buying it, not necessarily just for that, but it,
What? It sounds so great.
It's certainly selling items. I mean, somebody be interested in that place just to see the spirits.
Well, it sells about every 3 years, 2 or 3 years. No one
That's
stays.
about as long as they could stand it, I guess, huh?
I think so. And then years later, 2 or 3 years ago, I was conducting a public event at a historic haunted site. And we had taken a brief break, and I hear this couple talking, and they are discussing a house. And I figure out, I'm pretty sure that's the house they're talking about. And so I say, I can't help but overhear, and is it such and such, located so and so. That was it. And someone in their family had owned it back in the 80s, and they started talking about everything that happened there. And that was the experience that made me say, okay, I want to dig a little deeper into the why things happen. And I got into researching, investigating. It snowballed into writing books and working with historic sites and everything else.
So, Lisa, let me ask you a question. This is a bit of a side, but so I understand you're an attorney. That's interesting to me because I would say certainly not all the people we talk to, but some of the people we talk to don't seem to have the most rigorous attachments to facts and data. And so,
come on, tell us how you really feel, Ike.
I said some people, and so anyway, so it's interesting to me that, because I assume as an attorney that you have to, on some level, interact with the real world and contracts or the law or
try to
humans. So I guess my question is there any kind of, is that something that helps you with this? Are you more assiduous in your research than some people would be? Or alternately, does it make you a better attorney or a worse attorney? Or
well, I don't know that it makes me a better or worse attorney, but I think you do use. There's a subset of skills that are common, and that's observation, detail, paying attention, and certainly most of my career, and I've been an attorney for 30 years, has been in the courtroom, and so you learn to read people, you learn to anticipate what's going to be the next thing out of their mouth, etc., and analytical skills. And so I try to apply that to situations where we're investigating. And we try to be as objective as we can, and we'll be the first ones to say, if we can show that it's not abnormal, it's not something supernatural, we will. Sometimes to the consternation of the owner, but I do think it helps because it keeps you grounded, I think, because that's the mode of thinking I'm used to. And I think the flip side is I think it's helped because I think maybe it lends a little bit of assurance to people that, as you said, that I am grounded in reality. And as a former team member used to say, some people are just flaky in this field, to be real blunt. And I think that gives some assurance. And to be honest, contacts and ties through my legal profession have been some of the best contacts and resources for investigating it as well.
Lisa, this is Pete.
Hi.
Have you come across any evidence that would stand up in court? And what was it if you did?
Boy, there's a $64 question. No. But then you also have to look at the fact that some evidence that is used in a courtroom is notoriously fallible, including witness identifications. An adage that attorneys use is if you can put on your case without a witness, you sure want to, because reliability of memory and in observation is, well, that's a crapshoot.
Lisa, I want to ask you, you were in a documentary, Twisted Believers on the Weather Channel, and you were talking about investigating paranormal activity that happened after a major tornado that went through Joplin, Missouri back in 2011.
Yep.
I remember seeing a documentary on Netflix in the past year talking about when tsunami hit Japan, and when this one area and thousands of people were killed in the town. And to this day, they document this whole documentary was about paranormal things that have happened, spirits walking the roadways, trying to get home, weird phone calls. Was that type of activity happening following this tornado?
Yeah, and actually, even while it was happening, it was really interesting. A couple of things that happened. One thing was what they called the butterfly people, because this was not predicted. We knew a storm was coming, but they didn't think it was going to come the direction it did. It was rain wrapped, and so even Doppler radar did not realize that there was a hook, that there was a tornado. And it was an F5. It was one of the strongest F5s we've ever had. And 161 people died, the most lost since, I think, in the 30s, I think. Mainly because it was so unexpected. And it hit literally as the largest high school in the area was having graduation.
Wow.
So, of a class of about 2,000 kids and everyone attending. So all these people were out, aside from people who were already out shopping, etc. And so it just caught everyone not sheltered. And so as people were responding, as first responders are responding and ambulances and so forth, they kept hearing the same stories from kids, and as well as in the ER. Small children were describing the butterfly people. And I find it real interesting because they did not describe them as angels. They were uniformly described this way. And it was so close in time. No one is comparing notes. No one had heard this from someone else. And there were literally dozens. And they would say the butterfly people came and they would hold them down so the debris didn't hit them and they weren't pulled up. And they were calm. They were very felt safe with them. They described them as larger than people, but luminescent. And then at the same time, in the aftermath, you had people walking the streets, and the devastation was such that over 9,000 structures were destroyed in town. And the only thing I can compare it to is footage from the bombed out, like Dresden in World War II. You couldn't, even if you'd lived here all your life, for months, you would drive around and lose track of where you were because there literally was not enough of landmarks to, keep track of what street you were passing. And so people were walking streets and people would describe seeing hooded, cloaked shadow figures walking along with the survivors as if they are guiding them. And so you had both of these things going on, just even as it happened. And then afterwards, it was interesting. It took a few months, and then we started getting reports of a lot of spikes of activity, a lot more reports, new things happening, and not just in the tornado zone itself, but there were a number of first responders who lived outside the tornado zone who started having activity in their homes and things like that.
So let me change gears again here and ask you, because as you can tell, my love of whiskey and bacon, I'm a Southerner at heart, and so therefore I have some background and interest in the Civil War. I was actually not all that familiar with the history of the Civil War in Missouri. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and does that lead to a lot of activity, paranormal stuff related to that in your area?
Yes. The Western Theater doesn't get a lot of coverage on the History Channel, and I almost said whiskey there, the History Channel, etc. And so people aren't as familiar. But actually, the first large land battle of the Civil War took place about 12 miles from my house. The Battle of Carthage. It took place 2 weeks before Bull Run, and involved about almost 7,000 men. And the area ended up being known as the Burnt District because both sides used scorched earth policies. If you couldn't carry it, use it, then you burned it so the other side couldn't.
Yeah.
And that included crops, equipment, livestock, houses. It was very common for riders to come up, and as the war went on, most men were not home, or if there was a man in the house, there were a lot of lynchings, and a lot of times the wife and children knew the lynching party, but they would give the women notice. You got 10 minutes to load what you can in a wagon, and then they'd set fire to everything. So it got to the point that by the end of the war, there were very few people left. And there were some large battles and regular army engagements, but a lot of it was guerrilla fighting. The worst guerrilla fighting of the war took place here. And in about a 100 mile by 50 mile area was so contested that they would have over 1,000 guerrilla fighters at any given time fighting. And so it was beyond dangerous for civilians, everyone else. And so people just left. And so there were so many atrocities that happened. There are lots of sites that are connected with that time period that are haunted.
Tell us a bit about your paranormal research lab that you established and how long that's been going on.
We're going on about 12 years now. And it kind of just grew out of organically over time at activities, investigating and research. And we focus on documenting and recording activity. We do not go into, we try to clear houses and all of that.
Right.
We just look at it as our job is to try to document, record what's going on. And if we can find an explanation, fantastic. And then we do a lot of work with historic sites for fundraising, education, community involvement. And as a consequence, we've been able to work in a lot of places over time and have thousands of hours at different sites that I think it gives you a better depth of knowledge and information of what's actually happening there.
Go ahead, Ike.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask, when you're doing an investigation and are you finding that most of the time you can come up with a logical explanation for the activity, or is it a 50-50? What do you find in most cases?
Oh, well, I mean, there's a lot of places that whatever people are experiencing is either man-made, natural, or someone's kind of freaked themselves out, or sometimes there are people who are desperately wanting an experience that it becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy that that it happens. So there more places than not are not haunted per se, but there are a large number of places in this area, and I think a lot of it has to do with everything that happened here. This was the edge, the frontier for a very long time in our country, and it was a crossroads to go to other places. We had Indian wars, we had the Civil War, we had lots of mining and accidents, and then we had the old West and gunfights, and all of those things started in this area. The very first shootout of the old West was Wild Bill Hickok and Dave Tutt, and that happened 60 miles from my house. Likewise, some of the last events of the Old West happened here, as like the Dalton Gang members ended up robbing banks by car, and so you had all of these kinds of things happen in this area. And I think that's why you've just got a lot of energy that was here. During the Depression, a lot of the Depression era gangsters came through here. In fact, because Oklahoma was where more bank robberies happened there in the Depression than any other place.
Yeah.
And in Southwest Missouri, you have 4 states in a very small area. And back then, if you could cross the state line, you were gold. So, Bonnie and Clyde and Dillinger and Pretty Boy Floyd, all of those guys were in and out here so many times. Bonnie and Clyde robbed probably 10 places within 20 miles of my house. So
very rich history.
Yeah.
So tell us about your book, Haunted Joplin. What is that all about?
It's the history of Joplin, Missouri, and ghost stories that come out of it. And it's a real interesting place that would not exist probably if it weren't for the Civil War, because of another town being burned to the ground. But it also became the epicenter of the largest lead and zinc mining field in the world. And so you had people pour in here you had upwards of 1 million people in a very small area for decades, mining. And so you had everything that goes with it. You had murders, you had bordellos, you had vice, you had all of those things that lend itself to tragic endings.
You'd be all about that, Ike. That sounds like where you travel all the time.
That's right up my alley. I love tragic endings and bacon and whiskey.
Lisa, where can people find you on the web to pick up your books?
Well, the books they're written under Lisa Livingston Martin. You can find them, any of the book sites, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, etc. You can find on our website, paranormalsciencelab.com. You can find us on Facebook, as well as Lisa Livingston Martin author on Facebook. Also, Dark Ozarks page on Facebook and Instagram, which is another project that I have that we focus on the noir dark history of the Ozarks and legends and mysteries. So.
Well, we want to get you back on to talk just Ozarks, because I know that you can unpack a whole lot from that. Lisa Livingston Martin, thanks for being on the show tonight.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you asking me, and I'm happy to come back. It was fun.
All right. We'll look forward to getting you back on again. Once again, we'll have some links in the social media posts to find Lisa on the web. Okay, Ike, interesting things. Did you know all that was going on in Missouri?
I was aware that the Western Theater in the Civil War was important, and I was aware I didn't know too much about it. I'd love to. Gosh, we could have her on just talking about that stuff. It's definitely, as she said, sort of an underreported. Most of the activity people talk about is more in the East.
I wonder if her research into the Ozark will cover the TV series Ozark.
I hope so.
I hope so, because I'm looking forward to the new season on that.
And let me, if you don't mind, I mean, I know if we've got enough time, I'm going to skip my news thing here. It's about media. Are you guys aware there's a new movie out, just came out, I think, a couple of days ago, called Demonic by Neil Blomkamp, who was the director of Chappie and District 9. He's a South African director. Are you guys familiar with this at all?
No. Pete, you're not familiar with that one?
I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah.
I would recommend it because it's unusual, which means, it's not going to be to everyone's taste, but Neil Blomkamp does a lot of very unusual stylistic stuff visually, and he comes up with some odd ideas. And this is not entirely what the movie is about, but part of the movie is about, imagine if the Catholic Church had an exorcism and they wanted to hire special operations soldiers to go handle it. That's an interesting juxtaposition of ideas.
Sounds like a video game to me.
It's
got a good premise.
In some ways, it sort of is like a video game.
It kind of sounds like Doom.
There
you go.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting take on the whole possession genre. So anyone who's out there who's interested in kind of horror stuff, I would recommend it.
Demonic. All right, I'm going to put that on my list. Okay, here's a look at some of the weird, tantalizing, just plain bizarre story posted from our partners at the Full Spectrum Project on Facebook. This next story is coming to us from phantomsandmonsters.com. I believe that's a website run by Lon Strickland. Is that right, Pete?
That is correct.
Okay, so this next story, of course, the title of it is, you're going to love this, Large Black Dog, Woman in Blue Dress, and Furry Little Man. All that in one. Title alone tells you what we're talking about. The account was recently forwarded to Lon Strickland. It tells a story of a couple who moved into a Victorian-style house back in 1989. They were looking at a house, okay? The person who tells the story says they were newlyweds. They were out looking for houses. They go into this Victorian house with the realtor. Then they start looking around. Okay, the person says, as I looked in, I saw a large black dog leap toward me and jumped back. The dog did not appear further. Ghost of a dog, number one. Okay. Later, while back in the living room, we were talking about some unrelated matters, and I looked at the heating vent due to some movement. Get this, Ike. I saw a small furry man looking out at us. His hands were holding onto the grill work. When he noticed me looking, he quickly let go and vanished into the heating vent. I alerted the others, but none of them saw him. Okay, number two, there's your furry man. Shortly afterwards, why not? I saw a ghost figure of a woman in a blue dress in the corner of the room. Again, none of the others saw this apparition. Was this guy drinking before he went on this house tour? I don't know. That was never explained. But they weren't explained. He was able to rationalize the dog. He said, okay, maybe it's a spirit of a dog. The ghostly figure, bingo. Obviously someone who died in the house. What he couldn't figure out is where the hell did the furry man come from and where did he go? Not many times, I would imagine, if we see a Bigfoot or a small Bigfoot, do you find one in the vents of your home staring out at you. So here's the weird thing, though. The homeowner said they decided not to buy that house. They bought a house down the street instead. Never saw the furry man again. Ike, your take on this, please.
To me, this is just another... I don't even know why this gets in the news. I mean, this kind of thing is so common. It's the furry man who turns into the goat and the vent and the dress. And how many times do we have to hear this story?
Pete, have you heard of anybody spotting little furry men?
No, but it sounds like it might have been one of the Keebler elves.
Pete is a paranormal investigator in his day job, and he's investigated for, I believe, 30 years now, Pete?
About 30, 35 years, yeah.
Okay, and your summation is it was a Keebler elf.
It was a Keebler elf. I think they disturbed him baking cookies.
All right, folks, thanks for our next guest will be on deck shortly. We're going to wrap up this episode of the Road Beyond podcast. Ike, can you tell them about our social media?
Yes, peoples. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter as The Road Beyond Podcast, as well as this little YouTube channel. You should subscribe, hit the like button, get the notifications when we're doing this. You don't ever want to miss our next episode, which is all about bacon and whiskey.
bacon and whiskey, all that and more. All right. We'll see you shortly. Facebook Live and YouTube. Thanks for being here. I'm Todd Duplantis. We'll see you next time on The Road Beyond.